My roommate Dan and I met freshman year and ended up renting a 2-bedroom together starting sophomore year. Normal setup. He was quiet but easy to live with, kept to himself, paid rent on time, the kind of roommate you don't think twice about. For the first semester, everything was completely normal. He had morning classes, I had afternoon ones, we'd cross paths making coffee, watch something together sometimes on weekends. Nothing unusual at all. Around October, I noticed he'd stopped going to his morning class. Not a big deal on its own. Plenty of people skip a class here and there. But then he stopped going to his afternoon ones too. I only knew because I saw his schedule once, taped inside his closet door from move-in day, and started noticing he was never actually leaving at those times anymore. I figured maybe he'd switched to online classes, or was struggling with something and didn't want to talk about it. I didn't push. We weren't the kind of roommates who dug into each other's business. What I did start noticing was that I almost never saw him during the day anymore. His door stayed shut. If I knocked to ask something simple, he'd answer through the door instead of opening it, say he was busy, say he'd talk later. But things in the apartment kept moving. Dishes I'd left in the sink would be washed by the time I woke up. The trash, which I usually took out, would already be gone. The blinds in the living room, which I always left open, would sometimes be shut when I got home from an evening class. It took me longer than it should have to realize what was happening. Dan wasn't gone during the day. He was just never coming out of his room until after I'd gone to sleep. He'd flip his entire life to the opposite of mine. I didn't know why. And for a while, I didn't know how to even bring it up without it sounding like an accusation. I finally tried to catch him one night. I told myself I'd just stay up later than usual, not confront him exactly, just be around when he came out, see him in person, ask how he was doing. Around 1 a.m., I heard his door open. I was in the living room with the TV on low, and I heard him pause in the hallway before stepping out. When he saw me, he didn't say anything for a second. Just stood there. I asked him how things were going, kept it casual, said I hadn't seen much of him lately. He said he'd just been busy. Said it in a flat way that didn't invite a follow-up. I asked if everything was okay with classes, since I hadn't seen him head out in the mornings anymore. He said he switched most things to online this semester. It's not something either of us thought to check, and it was possible, plenty of people do that. But he said it fast, like he'd rehearsed the answer in case someone asked. I let it go that night. I didn't want to push a quiet guy into a corner over something that might have a completely reasonable explanation. But I started paying closer attention after that. I noticed his light was on under his door at every hour I happened to wake up and check, 2 a.m., 4 a.m., once even at 6 when I got up early for a flight. Always on. I never once, in the following 2 months, saw him asleep, or heard him getting ready for bed, or heard the kind of ordinary nighttime sounds you'd expect from someone sharing your apartment. One night, I got up for water around 3 a.m. and passed his door. It was open a few inches, more than I'd ever seen it. I could see part of his desk from the hallway. Papers were spread across it, some of them taped to the wall above it. I only caught a glimpse before I kept walking, not wanting him to think I was looking. But one detail stuck with me. Some of the papers had my class schedule written on them. Not his. Mine. My ex and I broke up in the spring, and since the lease was in my name, he moved out and I needed to fill the second room to cover rent. I used one of those roommate matching apps, filled out the usual profile, lifestyle habits, schedule, that kind of thing, and got matched with a woman named Priya within about 2 weeks. She seemed normal from our first meeting. Friendly, low-key, work from home a few days a week. We agreed on move-in for the following month. The first few weeks were fine. Nothing stood out. She kept to herself in the evenings, was tidy, paid her share on time. The first strange thing happened about a month in. I mentioned, just in passing, a restaurant my ex and I used to go to a lot, said I hadn't been back since the breakup. She said she knew the place, said it casually, like plenty of people would if it was popular. A few weeks later, I mentioned an inside joke from my relationship, something small, not even really explained in context, more just a phrase that used to make me laugh. She laughed too, the way you'd laugh if you actually got the reference, not just found it funny out of politeness. I asked her, half joking, if she somehow knew my ex. She said no, laughed it off, said maybe it was just a coincidence, some phrases get around. I let it go. It's easy to talk yourself into oversensitivity right after a breakup, seeing connections that aren't there because you're still raw about the whole thing. Then, about 2 months in, I came home to find she'd rearranged a few things in the kitchen. Nothing major, just moved the mugs to a different cabinet, moved the spice rack. When I asked why, she said it made more sense to her that way. It was such a small thing. But it was exactly, down to the shelf, how my ex used to arrange that kitchen when we lived together. I told myself it was probably just a common way to organize a kitchen, mugs near the sink, spices near the stove, nothing that couldn't be coincidence. I didn't say anything to her about it. It felt like too small a thing to raise, and I didn't want to seem like I was accusing my roommate of something over kitchen shelves. But it kept nagging at me, so one night I did something I probably shouldn't have. I looked through the roommate app's messages again, the initial matching conversation from before she moved in, just to see if there was anything I'd missed. There wasn't anything obvious. But I noticed her profile had been created only 3 days before we matched. Most people who'd been using the app a while had profiles from months earlier, sometimes longer. Hers was brand new, right around the time I'd posted that I needed a roommate. I brought this up to a mutual friend of mine and my ex's, carefully, not wanting to sound paranoid. I described Priya, mentioned her name. My friend went quiet for a second, then asked if Priya had dark hair, worked in marketing. I said yes. She said that was the name of someone my ex had started seeing, not long after we broke up. I confronted Priya that night. I didn't yell, I just asked her directly if she knew my ex. She didn't deny it right away. She just looked at me for a second, then said, I didn't think it would matter this much. It's just an apartment. I asked her to leave. She said she'd think about it. She's still living there. The lease renewal isn't for another 4 months, and legally, I'm told, I can't force her out before then without cause that would hold up. Disliking her isn't cause. I still don't fully understand why she did it. Whether it was her idea or his. I've stopped asking either of them. Marcus and I have been friends since we were 7 years old. Same street growing up, same school our whole lives, the kind of friendship where you don't really remember a version of your life without the other person in it. When we both ended up working in the same city after college, moving in together was the easiest decision either of us made that year. The first several months were exactly what you'd expect from living with your oldest friend. Comfortable. Easy. We had a rhythm, movie nights, splitting groceries, the normal stuff. About 4 months in, I woke up around 3 a.m. for no particular reason and heard the front door close quietly. I figured Marcus had gone out for something, cigarettes maybe, though I didn't know he smoked, or just couldn't sleep and wanted air. I didn't think much of it and went back to sleep. It happened again about a week later. Same time, almost exactly. I heard him come back a little after 5, moving quietly like he was trying not to wake me. I didn't say anything the next morning. It felt like a strange thing to bring up over breakfast, and I told myself it wasn't really my business what he did at night. We were roommates, not each other's keepers. But it kept happening. Not every night, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, always right around 3, always back a couple hours later. He never mentioned it. I never asked. About 6 weeks after I first noticed it, I finally brought it up, carefully, trying not to make it sound like an accusation. I just asked if everything was okay, said I'd noticed he'd been going out pretty late sometimes. He said he'd just been having trouble sleeping, said he liked walking when his mind wouldn't settle down. It was a reasonable enough answer. I've had insomnia myself before. I let it go. But it didn't stop, and it didn't feel like insomnia. Insomnia doesn't usually run on a schedule. This did. I started noticing details I hadn't paid attention to before. He always took his phone with him, obviously, but he also always took a small bag, the kind you'd use for a gym kit, except he never went to the gym at any other time. He'd leave it packed by the door during the day, like it was ready to go whenever 3 a.m. came around. I thought about looking inside it once, while he was in the shower. I stood in the hallway for a second, actually reached for the zipper, and then didn't do it. 15 years of friendship isn't something I wanted to risk over a bag, especially if it turned out to be nothing, and especially because some part of me didn't want to know if it turned out to be something. I asked him again, a few weeks after the first time, more directly. I told him it wasn't about judging him, I just wanted to understand what was going on, since it was clearly a pattern and not just occasional insomnia. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "It's better if you don't ask me that again." Not angry. Just final, in a way I'd never heard from him before, not once in 15 years. I didn't ask again after that, partly because of how he said it, and partly because I realized I was more afraid of an answer than I was of the question itself. He still leaves around 3, most weeks. Still comes back a couple hours later, still quiet about where he's been. We are still friends, still roommates, still splitting groceries and watching the same shows we always have. I've just stopped asking what he does between 3 and 5 in the morning. I tell myself it's because I trust him. Some nights, lying awake and listening for the door, I'm not sure that's actually true anymore.